Thank you. Amazing. Thank you.
That was a beautiful story. Thank you so much. And thank you, Nathan, for having me here today. You know, it's interesting because I actually was raised in a church. I'm from Mount Prospect, Illinois, so I'm also from Illinois. I joke that I think I was abused as a child because you must be on 6 months out of the year when you were in Illinois. And being in Florida now, and my kids are all raised in Florida, they have no idea what that's like.
Yeah.
Amen. But when Nathan came to my office, the first thing he said was, God sent me to you, and you're my publisher. I said, thank you. And, you know, I've been out of the church. I didn't raise my kids in the church. I have my own church stories that I'll share a little bit with you. And so I've had this sort of one foot in, one foot out kind of scenario with my relationship with God and church over the past 20 years. And so when Nathan came in, I was like, okay, sir, that's interesting. Let's see what we can do together. And what came about is this beautiful book. And if you haven't read The Wonders of You, you have to read it. It's really a powerful book. Nathan put so much of his experience and working with his dad, all of those years into this book that talks so much about how humans are wired, how God wires us differently and uniquely. And if you understand how people are wired, you can work better with them rather than wishing someone was different than what they are. You can say, oh, well, that person is a starter, that person's a finisher. Now Nathan's talking that, and now I can see people like that. So I want to tell you a little bit about what my life was like and what happened, and then how I started over in publishing. So I was raised in Mount Prospect, Illinois, which is a northwest suburb of Chicago. I have one sister, she's 14 months younger than me, and my mom and dad raised me in Mount Prospect Bible Church. So I went to church 3 times a week for my entire childhood. I didn't know that wasn't normal, honestly. Like, I think that I remember hearing there's these 2 twins in my middle school, John and Bob Graham, and they only went to church on Christmas and Easter. I was like, I went to church 2 times a year? I go more than that in a week. I was raised memorizing the Bible. We had an Awana program in our church. I don't know if you know Awana. Yep. Workmen are not ashamed. So I learned all of those Bible verses in the Romans Road and John 3:16, and I had to memorize the entire Psalm 23. So recited to you. Some had not. And I loved God. I went to youth camp. I was very committed. And I went to college at Winona State University in Minnesota. I was a distance runner. And so I was a typical college kid, right? My parents are pretty strict, so when I got my first month of freedom, I went off to deep end. And I had a lot of fun and got into a little bit of trouble, not to nothing bad, never had handcuffs on, not to this state, thank God. And something really shook my world. The spring semester of my freshman year, my parents drove up. My dad was an accountant, and my parents drove up to Winona State, and under the guise of they were going to pick up my uncle's tax documents so that my dad could do his taxes for him. My uncle lived in a town not too far from my college. I didn't really question it. I thought, okay, I'll go to dinner with you, whatever. So my dad picked me up in my dorm room, drove me back to the Holiday where they were staying. My mom was sitting in the corner of the hotel room. It was dark, and he said, sit down, girl. And I thought, oh my God, did they know what I've been doing in college? How could they know there's no cell phones yet? No, they didn't. But they said, Dad has cancer. It was stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He was 45 years old. Now, I didn't know what that really meant. I didn't really know how serious it was. They didn't really say anything about the severity of it. But we cried, and we went to dinner, and then I went out with my friends that night and got drunk like I normally would on Friday night. And that was kind of the end of that discussion. They drove home the next morning, and I continued living my college life. So we weren't in touch like we are now with texting and all of that. So I used to call my parents every Sunday evening. That was sort of the deal. So I would call and check in, and they would say he's fine. And summer came. That summer, between my sophomore and junior year, which was a year after, they had switched churches. Sometimes churches split and pastors, get angry with other pastors. I don't know if you've been on a church for a New York minute, but that's common, it seems. And they started going to this new church, Harvest Bible Chapel. They had bought a big Sam's Club warehouse in Arlington, Illinois. And they had built out about a quarter of it. So if you think of it being a big square, it was like, one quarter, and then the other 3/4 were like totally empty, raw space. So there's curtains, It is now like a huge multi-campus church, and I don't know if you know James McDonald, who was the pastor there. So I started going to this college youth group, and it was the first time in my college life, or my church life, I should say, that I actually found friends in church. The church I grew up in, it was kind of small, and the kids in the youth group were really like people I would have hung out with or anything like that. But we went, and we had fun on youth camps and stuff, but it was like that, it was contained to that. But I met this group of girls that became like so tight that summer. We were in Bible studies, we went to coffee together, all of this. And it was like this whole world changed for me. I went back to school that fall. I broke up with my boyfriend. I stopped going to bars. I had a Bible verse taped on my door in my apartment. And I ended up meeting this guy. I thought I'd be a missionary. So I met this guy. I eventually dropped out of college because we were going to get married and go to the Jacksonville Bible School in Texas and be missionaries. He was from a missionary family. And, it's interesting because part of what I wanted to talk to you about was the light and darkness. The light and darkness are almost indistinguishable sometimes. It's like going to the sunset, for those of you saying you go to the beach a lot, right? You watch the sunset and it's slowly going down, and then it goes below the horizon, but then there's still beautiful colors, and all of a sudden the darkness is there and it's not there anymore. The same is true with the sunrise, right? I was just over Miami Beach a couple weeks ago for a publishing conference, and I decided to go to the sunrise. So I got there, and it's becoming a little lighter. You don't quite see the sun yet, and all of a sudden it peeks through. And so I think life is a lot like that. So I had this experience of rediscovering the light again, and then it slowly went back into the darkness. I told you I dropped out of school, I thought I'd become a missionary, and what ended up happening was this man that I was engaged to at the time, his family went to a church that was on the south side of Chicago. Reverend Bill Winston, I don't know if you've heard of him. I went to that church, and it was like nothing I'd experienced before. It was 3-hour-long services. It was people falling over on the floor. It was miracles, speaking in tongues, and healing. And I went back to my dad, and I'm like, Dad, you can be healed. Like, you just say these verses, you can be healed. And he was like, April, God didn't work that way. It's not like a lottery. It's not like, you just pull the lever and you get all 7 if you say the right thing. I remember having all these arguments with him over him being healed. And that relationship ended with a black eye and restraining order. And my dad also died. So the darkness came again. But fortunately for me, part of the good news of that relationship was I got to be with my dad in the final moments when he died. I remember laying next to him in bed. Yes, he would read to him from the Bible. I was reading to him from 1 John chapter 4. And in that moment, that final moment, it was like this feeling of like, I don't know if you've ever been with someone when they died, but it's like you almost feel like their spirit left their body, and you know that even though you're calling 911 and they're going to come and try to resuscitate, you know that there is no resuscitating. And so it was a very confusing time for me because on the one hand, I was in this church that was all about healing and, God wants you to be happy and wealthy. And if you're really in God's will, that's what you can have. And yet my dad, who was this faithful Bible reading Christian who reads me while he loved me immensely, died. He didn't get healing. And he always said, there's no perfection in this world. There's perfection, outside of this world when you leave this world. And so it was like this wrestling between the light and the dark, the light and the dark, the light and the dark, always for me. And so at that time, because the relationship had ended, I had migrated to this other church called Life Changers International Church, with Pastor Gregory Dickow. I'm sure if you've heard of him. He's sort of the funny thing is he was on, I don't know if you have Angel Network, I'm not even sure if that's around anymore.
Yeah.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
I don't watch it. But so Bill Winston had his half hour on the show, we would watch that, and then this guy, Gregory Dickow, was on the next half hour right after that. So, and that church was in Barrington, and I lived close to Barrington. My mom had then sold my house, our childhood home. She moved to Urbana, Her sister lived in Champaign-Urbana, so she had moved. I moved in with a roommate, Palatine, and I was going to this church in Barrington. And so I ended up, it was a growing mega church. It was probably 2,000 members. I don't know what it is today. And I ended up, I was getting my degree. I went back to school, and I had elementary and middle school. And I thought I'd be a middle school math teacher, honestly. And I met my husband when I was down here visiting my cousins when I was on spring break, my junior year of college. And so we ended up getting engaged. And interestingly enough, he's Catholic, and I was always raised like Catholic, not Christian. I hate to say that because I don't believe that today, but I was very in love with Jeff. We dated long distance, but the church that I was in, it was like I was young, and it wasn't really taught to like think for myself at all. It was really taught with obedience and just do whatever you're told. And so I remember the pastor's wife, who I really loved a lot, she said to me, I think you're unequally yoked. God told me he's not the one for you. And I was 21. What did I know? So I sent the ring back. Yes, I sent the ring back. And within that year, I ended up becoming their homeschool teacher for their 4 kids. I got hired full time. So I'm working for the church. I'm homeschooling their kids. And I come back to Florida with my mom with this timeshare thing. And we ended up on Fort Myers Beach. And my cousin, who was a financial planner, had a Christmas party where he's having all his clients. We just happened to be down. He invited us to go. And so I ran into Jim's best friend, John, there. And John said, does Jim know you're in town? And I said, no, I wasn't going to call him. I thought he probably would not want to hear from me. He goes, no, you should call him. So I called him. He and I ended up going out to dinner that night, picked up where we left off, and 9 months later, I had my first daughter. 6 months later, we were married, and 3 months later, I was fired from that job. So it's interesting, the light and the darkness, how it all works, right? But I see my daughter, and I was our faith, my biggest blessing. She's what brought me here to Florida. It's how I got married to my husband. We've been married 22 years now. Another daughter, Molly, who's 20. She lives in Florida Gulf Coast, and another daughter, Amy, who's 16. And so I see God's hand in all of it, and I've grown so much in my spirituality because I've learned how to think for myself. I've learned how to discern what my spirit's telling me, and it might be different. Like you said, what the spirit's telling you might be different from what the spirit's telling your husband, and that's okay. It doesn't mean I have to convince someone that my truth is the only truth, or that what they're thinking is wrong. Today I like to say, live and let live. Like if it works for someone, great. If not, that's okay too. But for me today, a lot of following spirit just looks like exactly what you said. It's walking the beach, it's picking up the shell, it's watching the sunrise or the sunset, it's talking to humans and hearing their stories. And so with all of this, being a mom, I don't know, actually Sheila and I, we connected this morning. I've known her for probably 20 years, maybe that long. Our daughters we met through the Media Moms Club way back when. And I would raise my kids in the church because all of that church tragedy, that happened, and with my husband being happened, I just decided it's not for me. I don't want my kids raised in that. I don't want them to have to go through what I went through. And so we did our own thing. We raised them with their own version and kind of left it open. But during COVID, I was asked, I had a client that was a local church, Naples Community Church, which is down on Fifth Avenue. And I was asked by the pastor, we were doing remote work for them. Like, the pastor would record a sermon. I taught him how to upload it to Google Drive. So we would post on their YouTube, extract it for a podcast, post it on the podcast, and whatever. So I didn't like go to the church or anything like that. I was just providing a service for the church from my office. So the pastor called me and said, can you help us live stream? This is when COVID came and everything got shut down, and they couldn't really figure it out. They didn't have the equipment. And so I said, well, they come down and see what I can do. Brought my laptop, had my webcam, plugged it in. So for like 8 weeks, I'm there, like with him, the associate pastor, the couple that was the singers, and one other lady, and we had like these big lights. They were like almost like lights you would have in a garage, those big fluorescent lights to try to get some good lighting. And we had a generous church member who donated enough money to buy live stream equipment. So the only person there who was technical was me. You say people over 40 at this church, it was like, I was the only one under like 75. I'm not kidding, there was like not one kid at this church. And so yeah, could you be trained on how to run this live stream equipment? And I was like, I guess. So I ended up back in church again. And I met so many lovely people. And it really restored my faith in church. But that pastor at the time too, who I became friendly with because I'm working in a small church and all of that. And actually this was before COVID, I think my timeline screwed up a little bit. This is when I was still a remote worker. Let me digress for a quick second. They're kind of a mainline Protestant church, independent, but they do celebrate Lent. And the church that I was raised in did not really celebrate Lent. It wasn't like a big thing. I mean, we celebrate Easter, but it was like 40 days, like give up chocolate or coffee or whatever. So I remember asking him, I said, what really, like, why do you guys celebrate Lent here? What's the point? Because I don't really think that God's super impressed if you're like, I'm not going to drink coffee for 40 days. Like, I gave my life for you, but you give up coffee for 40 days. Like, it's not really the equivalent. So I decided that I would get up at 5 a.m. for the 40 days of Lent, and I would write every morning. I was now in sobriety. I've been sober for almost 8 years. And at that time, I was about 2 years sober. And one of the things I learned in the 12-step program is that to find out where you have blocked the sunlight of the Spirit. And so if God's always available, and if I'm not really hearing God's voice, then who is responsible for that? Me. So I thought, well, let me get up and I'm going to write every morning and I'm going to see where I've created these blocks. So I just got up, I would put my laptop on, and I had so many Bible verses packed in my head. I would just have to sort of listen and see that my book on surface. And I just had my laptop screen down, just enough so my fingers could fit in. Because I didn't want to worry about if I was making typos or whatever. I would just type for like an hour. And after 40 days, I would post them on my blog, I had a blog at the time. And at the end of the 40 days, sort of like you said, God tells you to do something and you don't want to do it, I was like, put that in a book. But I already published a few books previously because I was life coaching and doing some other things. But I was like, I'm not publishing that as a book. I'm not like a trained spiritual person. I don't even go to a church. I'm not even like someone who's had a life that would reflect good Christianity, to be honest with you. And I really didn't want to do it. But it kept coming to me, put this in a book, put this in a book. And I finally was like, okay, I'll put it in a book, simply to be obedient, and probably no one's going to read it, and I'm definitely not going to promote it at all. I'm not promoting this book. And I didn't. And that book is what led the doors for me to start O'Leary Publishing. Crazy enough, I had 2 friends from that book that asked me, how can you help me publish my book? And I was like, I guess I could. I mean, okay. So it was like, it wasn't like I was thinking like, how can I start a company to help people publish books? It was literally like out of the blue. So now fast forward, Nathan comes to my office and says, God told me that you're my publisher. So now you can weave this tale together and see how all of the pieces sort of fit. And I don't know how this thing works. I don't know how I ended up in this room here today. I don't know why I'm talking to you and telling you my story of Christianity or church trauma, but I know there's a reason, and I don't know if that's going to help you or help someone that you know, or maybe it's just even to connect the light and the darkness in your own life. That's why I put this paper together. It's underneath your agenda. I encourage you to do it in a quiet moment when you're home. I actually did this morning, and this is how I was laboring over, like, how am I going to talk? How am I going to present this? What exactly I want to say? And I did this on this piece of paper. The story I just told you, I columned things light, and I put an arrow to the darkness. Then I put an arrow back to the light, and then I put an arrow back to the darkness. So it's like my family life was in the light. The next thing in the darkness was my dad got sick, bad relationship, got a lot of knowledge. And back to the light, I got to be home with him. I got to be with him when he died. I got to be with him on those final treatments. Back to the darkness, he died, right? So it's like, how do we know when the light is peeking through, or how do we know when it's coming into darkness? I don't really know, but I know that that's the cycle and how it works, and I know that God's in all of it. So I'll just close with this. I was at a retreat in North Carolina this past fall, and it was some meditation and things like that. And I got this word, embrace the darkness. And it was like, oh yeah. So when I'm in those dark places, I don't have to hate it. I don't have to think that I'm out of God's will or things aren't right. I can say, the darkness only means the light is coming. And if I can just wait and I can be patient, it will come. So that's all I really have to say is that to me today, faith is a lot about just trusting that the light and the darkness are connected, and that the circle of how things happen is sort of a mystery, and I can't explain it. I can't explain why I'm here. I can't explain how I got Nathan. I can't explain, how, he was even had the courage to take the message and what he and his dad did to, at that very point in time, what happened in his life, what happened to you, that you were like ready to say, okay, now I'm ready to go, because you had this message long before you met me. But why then? Why now? I don't know. It's just to me the amazing part of how God works in all of us is that we can't quite understand why, but we know that no matter where we go, there's God. And just wait and the light will come.